This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
More than 150 people feared dead after a boat capsizes in Nigeria. French President Emmanuel Macron visits Rwanda as the two nations seek to normalize ties. And the DRC orders partial evacuation of the city of Goma after hundreds of aftershocks rock the eastern part of the country. Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you're joining us. This is Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, IMF offers Egypt an additional $1.6 billion to buffer its economy. And in sports, Zamalek outlast a stubborn FAP 82-53 to book Basketball Africa League semi-final slot. Let's begin the hour in Nigeria's Kano state, where about 156 people are reported missing after a boat accident in Kainji Lake. Authorities at the National Inland Waterways say the wooden boat was overloaded while ferrying passengers to the market. A rescue mission is underway and so far 20 people have been rescued, while 4 are confirmed dead. Eyewitnesses say the passengers aboard were on the way to a market across the lake and a newly found gold mine. Boat accidents in Nigeria are common according to authorities. Bad weather, overcrowding and lack of maintenance are some of the major causes. Meanwhile, authorities in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo say suspected Islamist militants have killed at least 22 people. The officials say the Allied Democratic Forces militia conducted attacks in an overnight raid in several villages near Beni town. The raiders are said to have used crude weapons including machetes and knives in the atrocities. Recently, the Congolese government had declared a military takeover in North Kivu province to combat brutality. A 4-month-old baby has been found alive. The infant is said to have been orphaned after another raid was carried out in Beni.
My sister has just been killed by the ADF and she has left us an infant baby. That is why we are asking the government to help us in this work to completely eradicate these ADF terrorists. Our sister has just left us this child of about 5 months. She leaves behind 7 children.
We have recorded the incursion of the ADF suddenly at night around 7 p.m. We found that they had committed crimes.
Let's now head to Mali, where the former interim president and prime minister have been released. This comes after mounting international pressure to release the leaders. Both the U.S. and the UN Security Council had called for their immediate release. The U.S. had also announced the suspension of security assistance to Mali. The interim president Ban Dao and Prime Minister Mokhtar Ouane were detained on Monday. They then resigned from their posts on Wednesday amid ECOWAS negotiations. Colonel Assimi Goita, who led the coup against former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, will now act as the interim president. He previously held the post of interim vice president.
There were deep differences both on the form and the substance which involved the operation of the transition. So that's why that in the end Mr. Ban Dao submitted his resignation letter. That happened in the presence of Mr. Goodluck Jonathan.
Well, for more on this story, we're now joined by CGTN's Deji Badmus in Lagos. Deji, Mali's military leaders have released both Ban Dao and Mokhtar Ouane on Thursday. What more do you have on this?
Well, Mahia, it's actually been confirmed by the families of both men that they've indeed been released. They were released overnight at about 1:30 a.m. Malian time, and they've actually reunited with their family in Bamako. That's what the families have actually confirmed. Now, what we do not know is the conditions under which they were released, even though the military spokesperson says both men resigned tendered their resignation now in the presence of Goodluck Jonathan, who is leading the ECOWAS delegation to that country to try and settle the problem there. But of course, probably some conditions were given. We wouldn't know until much later in the day, but there's no question at all that these men were actually forced to resign. So everyone is waiting to see how the international community reacts to this. I mean, the international community, including ECOWAS and the African Union, had always made it clear that they would not tolerate a military-led transition, if you like. But now you have a military man as the interim president. That certainly will not go down well with ECOWAS. It wouldn't go down well with the international community and the AU. So we just wait and see what happens going forward. But obviously, I think we're in for more drama now in the coming days.
And Deji, mentioning the international community, the United States had announced the suspension of all military assistance to Mali following the most recent coup. How does this then impact the security situation in the country, especially in its fight against jihadists?
Well, look, that suspension of military assistance had actually been in place. Remember when the first coup happened sometime last year, in October or August, I should think, the U.S. military came out to announce the suspension of every military assistance to the Malian military. And what essentially that means, and of course, what the U.S. has done now is to maintain it. It means that suspension will remain. And what it means is that military training that the U.S. had actually been conducting for the Malian military in that country would not happen. And that training had been quite important. You know, the Malian military is actually weak, has not been able to provide protection now for that country. So obviously this would have enormous impact on the security situation in Mali. The military will not be getting the needed training. They will be getting the needed military assistance. And I think this is probably just the first leg. With what has happened now, with Assimi Goïta declaring himself interim president, I think there will be more action. So we're likely to see more countries now, other countries in the international community now take actions like the U.S. is taking now against the military government in that country. And it's really very bad because as we speak today, Mahia, large swathes of Mali is controlled by jihadists. The military has not been up to it in terms of engaging the bandits, if not for the presence of French troops in that country and, of course, UN troops. Some people will tell you that Bamako would probably have been overrun by the jihadis by this time. So it's a tenuous situation, no doubt. We're all waiting to see what happens, but obviously Assimi Goïta is not going to have things easy at all. I don't think he's going to have things his way at this time.
All right, Deji, thank you for speaking to us on Africa Live. CGTN's Deji Badmus joining us live there from Lagos, Nigeria. Moving further afield now, another mass shooting in the United States, this time in the state of California. 8 people were killed after a transit worker opened fire at a rail yard in San Jose before taking his own life. The shooting took place early Wednesday morning. The victims, along with a survivor who's in critical condition, were all employees of the transit agency. A bomb squad was searching the yard and nearby buildings after at least one explosive device was found. Officials identified the gunman as 57-year-old Sam Cassidy. He was a maintenance worker at the facility and his home near the site was burning as he began shooting. Mark New reports from San Jose.
Over my shoulder behind me is the VTA facility, or Valley Transit Authority. That's where the shooting occurred. And amazingly, just across the street right in front of me is the sheriff's office, and just down the block is the San Jose Police Department. So despite the heavy law enforcement, the gun violence continues. 8 employees were shot and killed. 1 person is in critical condition. Now, the gunman died of self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Authorities identified him as Sam Cassidy, a VTA employee. Authorities are also investigating a fire that happened at the gunman's home early in the morning. Officials emphasize that if not for the heroic actions of law enforcement, it could have been much worse. officers rescued more than 40 people at the facility.
There was active shooting going on at that time. There were victims shot in 2 separate buildings, but they responded the way that they should. They took their life in their hands, and I know for sure that when the suspect knew that law enforcement was there, he took his own life.
4 canines have been deployed at the scene. It's one of those dogs that detected explosive material. That's why bomb squads and a bomb robot are all on the scene searching every crevice. They'll likely be working through the night, and the full examination and clearance of the scene could take days. Governor Gavin Newsom was also on the scene. He expressed a numbness, pointing out other mass shootings that he'd had to console victims at, including ones in Gilroy, San Bernardino, Santa Barbara, all happening in recent years. He made a plea to put aside politics and put yourself in the shoes of the families of the victims.
It begs the damn question, what the hell is going on in the United States of America? What the hell is wrong with us? We have elected officials of all political stripes who want to be here for this nation. But it's time to deal with the endemic before this pandemic of gun violence, the pre-existing condition that somehow sort of pushed aside last year, but now has raised its ugly head again this year. And wake up to this reality and take a little damn responsibility, all of us, to do a little bit more and a little bit better this time.
At some government buildings, flags have been lowered to half-mast. A vigil to commemorate the victims is planned at City Hall for Thursday night. Mark New, CGTN, San Jose, California.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's former chief advisor has lashed out at his former boss in testimony before members of Parliament. Dominic Cummings slammed the government's failure in handling the coronavirus pandemic and says the Prime Minister is unfit for the job. Nicole Johnston reports from London.
The truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisors like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this.
It's been an explosive takedown of the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic.
When the public needed us most, the government failed. And I'd like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily, how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that.
Dominic Cummings was once the second most powerful person in Downing Street after the Prime Minister. He was Boris Johnson's chief advisor. Now he's being grilled about what went wrong in the early days of the crisis. But last year he was caught breaking lockdown rules and was later fired after falling out with the Prime Minister.
This is like a scene from Independence Day with Jeff Goldblum saying the aliens are here and your whole plan is broken and you need a new plan, right?
Cummings says the UK locked down too late. Its pandemic plans were completely hollow and that secrecy in the government's scientific committee was catastrophic.
Dominic Cummings paints the picture of a chaotic and incompetent government that had no plan on how to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. He said there was no plan for getting more personal protective equipment, furlough, shielding or testing. And he called the Department of Health a smoking ruins.
Some of Cummings' strongest criticism was for the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock.
I think that the Secretary of State for Health should have been fired for at least 15, 20 things, including lying to everybody in multiple occasions, in meeting after meeting in the Cabinet room and publicly.
And some of the relatives of COVID-19 victims say Dominic Cummings deserves as much blame as the rest of the government.
It's all damage control. This man has, from the very beginning, been very malicious and tactical about his own career. And if he knew at the time that people were going to die, and then he knew decisions were coming out like that, if he really was any worth as a character, he'd have come out and solved it then.
As for the Prime Minister, Cummings said Boris Johnson was worried the first lockdown would be an overreaction that would cripple the economy.
The handling of this pandemic has been one of the most difficult things this country has had to do for a very long time. And none of the decisions have been easy. To go into a lockdown is a traumatic thing for a country. To deal with a pandemic on this scale has been appallingly difficult, and we've at every stage tried to minimise loss of life, to save lives, to protect the NHS, and we have followed the best scientific advice that we can, Mr. Speaker.
Dominic Cummings' testimony has detailed what he describes as an endemic failure of government that has cost the lives of more than 125,000 British people. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
France has imposed a quarantine period for people coming from Britain. It comes after increasing prevalence of the coronavirus variant first detected in India. France's junior minister for European affairs says the isolation will last 7 days. Visitors also need to present a COVID-19 test carried out less than 48 hours before departure. France's action follows Austria's on Tuesday. It banned direct flights and tourist visits from Britain. On Wednesday, over 3,100 people in Britain tested positive for COVID-19. The daily new cases passed 3,000 for the first time since mid-April. And speaking of France, the French President Emmanuel Macron is in Rwanda for his first official trip to the country. The French President was received by President Kagame. The visit looks to reset ties between both countries. For his first public stop, he visited the Genocide Memorial. The 1994 genocide has been a major sticking point between both countries. Kagame has repeatedly accused France of aiding in the genocide. Speaking at the Genocide Memorial, President Emmanuel Macron said France recognized its responsibility but said it was not complicit. He made the speech in the presence of survivors of the 1994 genocide. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a closer look at the history of the relations between both countries.
The final step to normalization is how a French official described French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Rwanda. Macron becomes the first French president to visit Rwanda since 2010. Now, Rwanda cut ties with France in 2006 following an arrest warrant issued by a French judge against Rwandan officials over the downing of a plane carrying President Juvenal Habyarimana in 1994. That incident ignited the genocide that claimed at least 800,000 lives. In 2019, President Macron established a commission to review France's role in the genocide. The commission found that France bore serious and overwhelming responsibility for the genocide. The report, however, exonerated France from complicity in the killings. Now, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame described the outcome of the report as a big step forward towards mending ties between the two countries. In 2009, diplomatic relations between the two countries were restored, but France has not had an ambassador in Kigali since 2015. While in Kigali, President Macron is expected to name an ambassador to Rwanda and will deliver a speech to the Genocide Memorial. Back to you.
Well, for more on this story, we're now joined by CGTN's Mohamed Abubakar, who is in Kigali. Mohamed, the French president arrived earlier today in Kigali. What is the latest on the ground?
Well, yes, Mahia, it is a very historic and symbolic visit by the French President Emmanuel Macron. He was received this morning in Kigali by President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. And his first visit upon arrival was to go to the Rwanda, or rather the Kigali Genocide Memorial. It is an important visit for the French President as he looks to mend the friction and the diplomatic friction between the two countries. In his address to the Rwandan public, it was rather an emotional one, where he did not officially apologize, yes, but he did recognize France's responsibility in the genocide that happened in 1994 against the Tutsis, and he says he does not expect Rwandese people to forget this tragic event, but he hopes they can find it in their heart to forgive France for the part they took in the genocide that happened in 1994. He will be also attending a state banquet, or rather dinner, later in the evening today, before he caps off his visit tomorrow, where he'll be visiting a technical school and also reopening the French Cultural Center here in Kigali. All in all, Mahia, the president of France hopes that this visit can be able to smoothen the cracks between the tense relationships between the two countries. Mahia.
All right, Mohamed, thank you very much for your insights. Mohamed Abubakar joining us live from Kigali, Rwanda. Well, stay with us here on Africa Live. We'll have plenty more after this short break.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's take you back to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the government has ordered residents to evacuate from the city of Goma in the eastern part of the country. This comes days after Mount Nyiragongo erupted on Saturday, killing at least 30 people and displacing about 25,000. Since, hundreds of earthquakes have been felt in eastern DRC and cracks have formed on the ground. The government has declared the evacuation is mandatory, with locals relocating to Sake, a town 13 miles from Goma. The United Nations is also moving about half of its staff to Bukavu in the south.
There are many earthquakes which are linked to this volcanic phenomenon, but which continue, and which make volcanologists not completely rule out that there may be either even more earthquakes, or even a second volcanic event, or even a second rush. We have a large presence of United Nations agencies. We have more than 2,500 people in the city of Goma, and therefore it is our obligation to our staff and to the families of our staff to distinguish those which are essential, critical for emergency response, and coordination of what are not. In any case, we are not going to work in these conditions, so we are in the process of relocating the personnel to help them find safety conditions for a period until the volcanic event can be declared over.
Now, at least 300,000 migrants across the East and Horn of Africa region were affected by COVID-19 last year. A report by the International Organization for Migration found that widespread border closures and other movement restrictions severely impacted migrants who depend on the ability to move across borders for work. Here is CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa with that report.
When COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, governments worldwide enforced movement restrictions to cap the infection rates, and the East and Horn of Africa region was no exception. The International Organization for Migration's annual flagship report on migration trends and population movements in the region now shows the impact of the pandemic on migration patterns. By mid to late March, most countries in the region, among them Burundi, Djibouti, Eritrea, Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan and Uganda, had either closed their airports and land borders or implemented partial closures. This spelled dire consequences for vulnerable migrants, including internally displaced persons, refugees, asylum seekers, unaccompanied minors, and returning and stranded migrants. The widespread air, land and sea border closures and other movement restrictions put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19 severely impacted more than 300,000 migrants who move across borders for work. The report found that an increase in stranded migrants in the Arabian Peninsula triggered spontaneous returns, particularly from Yemen back to Djibouti and Somalia. Those who could afford to do so used the same network of smugglers to try and return to their homes in the Horn of Africa. Others report having been forced to cross the desert on foot with little or no resources left for their return journey. At the same time, migration has become even riskier as smugglers try to circumvent COVID-19 movement restrictions and maximize profits. Mohamed Abdikar, Regional Director at IOM's Regional Office for East and Horn of Africa, said, and I quote, "We also need to see improved efforts to curb transnational organized crime regionally and internationally that is responsible for so much of the smuggling of migrants and trafficking of persons in the region. Without this, the efforts of member states to control migration will continue to be undermined and migrants will continue to suffer." End of quote. Wilkisanyabwa, CGTN.
Over to Tanzania now, where the creation of e-learning platforms and apps is on the rise. Innovators are working hard to offer students access to study materials, tools, and opportunities to study abroad. This has in turn forced traditional higher learning institutions to find ways to keep up with this new digital learning curve. CGTN's Daniel Kijo tells us more.
What started as a website in 2017 grew into an award-winning app in just 4 years. The SchoolBiz app is helping hundreds of Tanzanian students gain access to reading materials, discussion forums, as well as scholarships at China's top universities. Kizwalo Simbila is a Tanzanian edutech innovator who launched the SchoolBiz app.
Students can discuss, network, and they can learn online. Because the platform, how it's created, it's a platform whereby anybody is free to download and is free to apply and use it.
In 2020, the SchoolBiz team participated in China's College Student Innovation and Entrepreneurship competition. The team made it to the top 3 and was recognized for nurturing student ideas into realities. The SchoolBiz app has 500 users already. Mark Shayo is one of them. He is a university student in Dar es Salaam and says the app has added value to his studies.
I like the app. It helps me study. I sometimes create groups for discussing topics. It has also helped me look for scholarships. I used to think it was almost impossible to study abroad, but through this app, I now have those plans.
Some education experts fear the presence of a vacuum in Tanzania's education sector, an absence of first-world innovative teaching methods, and lack of academic materials had made learning a big challenge. This has caused Tanzanians to leave the country in search of a better standard of higher education. Educators of Tanzania's biggest university say they are now looking at restructuring the way courses are taught so as to compete with the world's top universities. They hope by digitizing and modernizing their curriculum, students will decide to stay in Tanzania to study.
Our vision is to become the world-class university of international standards. And we usually compete in the rankings, international global rankings. So we pay a great deal of attention on what we do because we operate in a competitive world.
Maya Lim and Shule Direct are learning innovations similar to the SchoolBiz app. Both were invented by young Tanzanians to help students take the leap into further education by creating search engines to find primary and secondary schools as well as universities. But unlike other apps and e-learning tools, the SchoolBiz app offers Chinese university scholarships to users for those that still want a chance to study abroad. The core objective of the SchoolBiz app, according to its founder, is to improve Tanzania's education sector by easing the learning process, something academic institutions like the University of Dar es Salaam are also trying to do. Although the approach is different, the end goal is the same: to bring innovations that help the country's education sector see consistent improvement right from the grassroots. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's take you back to our top story in Nigeria's Kano state, where about 156 people are reported missing after a boat accident in Kainji Lake. Authorities at the National Inland Waterways say the wooden boat was overloaded while ferrying passengers to the market. A rescue mission is underway, and so far 20 people have been rescued while 4 are confirmed dead. Eyewitnesses say the passengers aboard were on their way to a market across the lake and a newly found gold mine. Well, Well, let's get more on this story now. CGTN's Tessem Akende joins us on the phone live from Jos, Nigeria. Tessem, thank you for joining us. A tragic accident there. What is the latest on the ground now?
Well, the latest is that investigation has started and more people, swimmers and other people have been brought in for rescue operations to see how more people can be brought out from the water. About 22 people have been brought, have been saved from, who were actually wearing life jackets were saved, alive, while 4 others were brought out dead. So the swimmers are actually in the water now carrying out whatever operations they can carry to rescue other people who are in the water. What we can also tell you at the moment is that President Muhammadu Buhari has sent condolences to the victims and families of those involved in the tragedy and has directed that the related authorities carry out all investigation and ensure that as much as possible those who are still in the water are rescued alive.
And Tessem, officials are citing overloading as a possible cause of the accident. What else do we know at this time?
Well, another revelation is the fact that the boat itself is very old, so it's a possibility that age has actually, hit it really hard. Another concern is that weather could just be a part of it. The rains are here now, and so with the age and perhaps the bad weather or hazy weather, it could have also contributed to the tragedy. But investigation will be carried out. The president has directed that investigation be carried out, and all of this we hope will be, revealed. And as journalists, we're keeping track of happenings, and we will be following issues very carefully.
All right, Tessem, thank you very much for your updates. CGTN's Tessem Akende joining us live from Jos, Nigeria. Moving on, here's what's coming up in the business. The IMF offers Egypt an additional $1.6 billion to buffer its economy.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's start the business off in Egypt, where the International Monetary Fund is expected to provide an additional $1.6 billion in financing to the North African country after its executive board approves the funding in the coming weeks. The IMF has reached a staff-level agreement with Egyptian authorities on the additional funding. The Washington-based lender approved a $5.2 billion loan for Egypt in June last year to help it cope with challenges posed by the pandemic and meet its budget deficit and balance of payment shortfalls. Egypt is the only country in the Middle East and North African region whose economy grew last year rather than contract amid the pandemic-induced lull. Its economy is expected to expand by 2.8% in the fiscal year ending June 30th and rise 5.2% during the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Moving on, the Bank of South Sudan says it's increasing the weekly supply of US dollars it provides to commercial banks and forex bureaus to from $5 million to $8 million. The central bank says the move is to try and capture excess liquidity in the market. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The Bank of South Sudan says commercial banks in the country will receive $5 million and forex bureaus $3 million weekly. The bank says it hopes the hard currency it is providing will remove excess local currency in the market and reduce inflation.
Our attempt really to stabilize the exchange rate is indirectly should contribute to the stability of prices.
The local currency has recently gained strength against the US dollars. However, many Juba residents say they are not feeling its impact.
The dollar is now coming down, but there is no way we can have to see things at the same price down of last time. Because normally if you go to the market, now we just know that the dollar is now reaching the level where people now can get something good, but there is no way. Even though if I go to market, I can get this on the price of market. Even though cooking oil, just the same price down of last time.
One civil society group in South Sudan's capital, Juba, is hailing the provision of the US dollars by the central bank, but it is urging the government to focus on maintaining lasting peace as a solution for the country's ailing economy.
We know that right now investors fear to come to this country because of the nature of the conflict and because of the environment. We need to improve this so that we see some of these industries coming. We see a very serious investment in this country so that we are able to generate some kind of employment.
The Bank of South Sudan obtained $174.2 million in March from the International Monetary Fund. The bank says it is using part of that funding to try and stabilize prices in the market. Some of it will also be used to settle salary arrears for civil servants. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And still in East Africa, Kenya's central bank held its main lending rate at 7% on Wednesday, saying inflation was expected to remain within the target range. The decision is the 8th consecutive hold by policymakers and was in line with the consensus forecast of economists and market participants. The rate of inflation stood at 5.8% in April, well within the government's preferred band of 2.5 to 7.5%. The economy had experienced a fairly strong recovery in the first quarter, the MPC said, citing leading indicators. To North Africa now, Tunisia's central bank governor has urged parliament to approve a $4 billion IMF loan amid a worsening economic situation in the North African state. Talks between Tunisia and the IMF to agree on economic reforms to unlock the package began on May the 18th and were to last for 3 weeks. As Adnan Shawashi reports, Tunisia's Apex Bank has warned that the economic crisis in the country will deepen if no salvage plan is put in place over the next 2 months.
The central bank governor urged the government and parliament to develop a reform program with the International Monetary Fund. The official also warned of economic implications if Tunisia's sovereign rating is downgraded a notch lower to C.
Tunisia needs to pass through the IMF to be able to borrow on the international financial market. Rating agencies are unhappy. Moody's downgraded Tunisia's rating. In addition, Fitch Ratings sought an assessment by the end of May. Tunisia is not ready to meet this request within the deadlines. We asked for an extension of the deadline until June, otherwise there will be a downgrade to C.
Marwan Al-Abbasi explained that the COVID-19 pandemic has had negative repercussions on the formal and informal economy. Consequently, the engines of economic growth, namely investment, exportation and consumption, were affected.
It is the first time in Tunisia's history and since 1962 that the country's GDP has reached negative 9%. We were expecting a GDP growth of around 3% in 2020. The 12% difference between 3% and negative 9% in GDP is unprecedented. This is a huge problem due to the lack of resources to the state and the paralysis of the economy due to the pandemic.
El-Abbasi informed the Finance Committee at Parliament that the central bank and the IMF are concerned about a possible rise in inflation rate in Tunisia next year. The inflation rate reached 4.8% in March 2021.
2021 is a very difficult year. According to the central bank data, the situation has deteriorated. Our economic indicators are not favorable for successful discussions with the IMF. Tunisia needs a monetary policy with a new economic and fiscal policy. Approving the IMF package will be conditioned.
The central bank governor noted that it is important to rationalize importation and promote local and foreign investment. He also criticized the underuse of resources, mainly phosphate, gas and wheat.
Marouel Abbesi declared that the top priority of the central bank is to reform the foreign exchange system by introducing digitalization. The governor said it's possible to carry out this reform with the IMF while respecting the country's specificities. He also called for an economic and political truce in Tunisia. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, the concept of COVID-19 vaccine vacations is gaining momentum around the world. South Africa, which is a highly recognized medical tourism destination, may, however, miss out on this trend because of the slow pace of its vaccine rollout. The country has faced a number of hiccups in trying to get its program off the ground. So far, just 650,000 people, mostly healthcare workers and some elderly, have been vaccinated, as CGTN's Julie Shire finds out.
The idea of going on holiday to an exotic location to get a COVID-19 jab exists. The Maldives, for instance, is planning to set itself up as a vaccine tourism spot. South Africa is a reputable medical tourism destination, but it will miss the boat to offer the same due to its slow-paced vaccine program rollout.
South Africa will miss out on vaccine tourism because other destinations, what they do is that they vaccinate their citizens, and then they have a springboard to use vaccine tourism as a way to achieve these health outcomes where tourists come visit the destination and get vaccinated at destination.
South Africans themselves are not waiting around. Those who can afford to do so are opting to travel elsewhere.
Well, I'm 64, so I'm in a high-risk category. I also have asthma and high blood pressure. It was possible as a visitor to Zimbabwe to access the vaccine program. And so we decided to make the trip, to fly to Zimbabwe. We flew to Harare and we went to one of the public hospitals in Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe is one of a handful of countries in southern Africa and around the world offering jabs to foreigners.
But I think that they've adopted a very progressive and intelligent policy, which is if you are in Zimbabwe, whether you're there on business or whether you're there as a tourism and you need a vaccine and you have time to go and get the vaccine, you're free to get the vaccine in Zimbabwe.
So far, just 1% of almost 60 million South Africans have been vaccinated.
So vaccination is not just about trade, it's about the survival of the tourism industry, which in the South African context is 2.8% of GDP and the second highest employer after agriculture. Smaller islands such as the Seychelles, they are now speaking about allowing visitors from overseas to come to those countries and get vaccinated.
The ebb and flow of coronavirus infections is squeezing the lifeblood of the tourism industry and the economy. The country's vaccine program has progressed to the second phase, but the wait for vaccines is still slow, with a third wave taking hold. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. It's time for us to take another short break, but don't go anywhere. There's still plenty more coming up.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, Nigerian music has gained traction and wide acceptance around the globe. Genres like Afrobeat, Fuji, and others echo the vibes of culture and tradition. What adds uniqueness to the Nigerian sounds are the local music instruments. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has that story.
Sounds from diverse locally produced musical instruments synchronized into one musical piece. Entertainer Abdul Rashid Salaudeen is taking Nigerian sound to the world through his craft of making homegrown musical instruments. The 33-year-old was born into this profession, handed down through centuries of an ancestral craft. Instruments like the talking drum, maraca, tamba, bass drum, bata, iron gong all represent the unique cultures and ethnic groups in Nigeria, each telling a story, adding to the many that have earned Salaudeen patronage home and abroad.
This business I'm into has been existing right from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, my father, then to me. I find my joy doing what my father left for me. And it's all about anywhere I go, I'm proud of it. If we know how to play instrument, we know how to manipulate it, and it will deliver what we have. We can play a live band of maybe 4 local instruments live, and I'm very sure of it, you enjoying it than the live jazz drum. They'll play even with the keyboard or anything.
Apart from singing, playing and producing the musical instruments, Salaudeen has been coaching others in the trade. From sourcing the right materials locally to construction, a lot of work goes into his art.
The wood we use in making drum, we'll go to forest, we'll buy it. Like the calabash of making the, making the maraca. The calabash, we get it from the north here. The bead of the maracas itself, I go down to Lagos and buy it. Most of these things that we use in producing these local instruments are not beads in one place. It's scattered, it's like fingers. So you go here, buy this, go here, buy this, go here, buy this. So before we use it and make it a single something.
Tourists and locals are attracted to his work, but the insecurity, especially in the northern region, coupled with other challenges, has affected patronage.
Some years ago, we thank God, when the white people comes around, before the insurgency we had in Nigeria, when they come around, they like to visit my place, and during then I'm very happy. Even they will not buy from you, they will check what you have, like give you kind of word of encouragement. In short, if even someone will not buy drum, will buy something to show off, but the fear itself that the has created in them, so it's really not maybe allowing people to come to where we are located.
The graduate of social development earns around $500 from his craft monthly. But what motivates him the most is mentoring other young people in the art to help them earn a living. Salaudeen's ultimate goal is to promote Nigerian tourism by building a museum for unique musical instruments and showcasing them to the world. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And here's what's coming up in the sport. Zamalek outlast a stubborn FAP 82-53 to book Basketball Africa League semi-final slot.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
I think as humans, we sometimes forget that we come from water, that it's not a foreign space. We spend our first 9 months in water. We're born from water into light, sound, color, breath. As we become forgetful of water, we lose a connection to the planet and to ourselves and to each other. We are a species of a blue planet, of an ocean planet. It should never have been called planet Earth. It should always have been called planet Ocean.
Africa Live. Find your voice.